Under fire from critics who charge he's been blurring the lines between Iraq and 9/11. President Bush was forced to clarify yesterday.
We've had no evidence that Saddam Hussein was involved with the September the 11th.
The latest Lemoyne College Zogby International Survey shows almost 90% of American soldiers think the war is in retaliation for Saddam's role in 9/11. Where would they get such an idea?
Trouble in a part of the world that had so much resentment and so much hatred that people came and killed 3,000 of our citizens. You know, I've heard this theory about, everything was just fine until we arrived, and then, kind of the stir up the hornet's nest theory. It just doesn't hold water as far as I'm concerned. The terrorists attacked us and killed 3,000 of our citizens before we started the freedom agenda in the Middle East. What did Iraq have to do with what?
The attack on the World Trade Center.
Nothing, except for it's part of, and nobody's ever suggested in this administration that Saddam Hussein ordered the attack. Iraq was the lesson of September the 11th is take threats before they fully materialize, Ken. Nobody's ever suggested that the attacks of September the 11th were ordered by Iraq.
According to a poll conducted by the Program on International Policy Attitudes at the University of Maryland in July of 2003, 7 in 10 people in a poll say the Bush administration implied that Iraq and its leader Saddam Hussein were involved in the September 11th attacks against the United States. And a majority, 52%, say they believe the United States has found clear evidence in Iraq that Saddam was working closely with al-Qaeda terrorist organizations.
I have suggested, however, that resentment and the lack of hope create the breeding grounds for terrorists who are willing to use suiciders to kill to achieve an objective. I have made that case. And one way to defeat that, defeat resentment, is with hope. And the best way to do hope is through a form of government.
This is where President Bush made the case for democracy in Iraq.
It's their country. And the government ought to reflect their traditions and their history. All we expect is people to be treated with respect and there to be self-governance in a way that tolerates differences of opinion.
We now know that their way does not include democracy.
One of the hardest parts of my job is to connect Iraq to the war on terror.
The single largest group to support President Bush during this terrible Iraq debacle has been the American Christians. The single largest group to suffer in Iraq have been the Iraqi Christians. We only have to look at the new Iraqi Constitution, which was ratified with the support of the U.S. government, to understand why the Christians are having the problems they are having currently in Iraq. All we have to look at is Article 2, Section 1. First, Islam is the official religion of the state, and it is a fundamental source of legislation. And in Section A, no law that contradicts the established provisions of Islam may be established. Even though other articles within the Iraqi Constitution spells out such things as safeguarding religious sanctity, the state guaranteeing freedom of worship, it all goes back to Article 2. First, Islam is the official religion of the state and it is a fundamental source of legislation. Section A, no law that contradicts the established provisions of Islam may be established. There is absolutely no protection for any other religion in Iraq than Islam. Before the war, Christians represented just 5% of the Iraqi population. However, of the refugees fleeing the country, 40% are Christian. In the past year alone, Christians have been decapitated, murdered, crucified. Despite Christian complaints of mistreatment, the U.S. government has told the Christians they don't want to establish a precedent of favoritism by responding to special pleadings. Christians don't have to worry about returning to their churches, since nearly every Christian church in Iraq has been burned. It is estimated that oil revenues in American banks are somewhere between $35 billion and $60 billion. None of this will go to the small minority of Christians left in Iraq, Christians who have to hide their identity to keep from being murdered. Few Iraqi Christians have been allowed to immigrate to the United States. This is to present to the rest of the world an illusion of diversity in Iraq to demonstrate that the democracy is working. However, instead of giving the Iraqi Christians freedom, what the United States has given them is a death sentence. Iraq is now a constitutional, fundamentalist Islamic country. What this means is there is no future in Iraq for Christianity by constitution. This is well understood by George Bush, but to allow these Christians to immigrate to the United States would demonstrate the failure of this administration's push to bring democracy to Iraq. It's a tragic irony that the greatest number of supporters for George Bush in this country continue to be the Christians, and it's through the failed policies of this administration that the Christian religion is being destroyed in other countries. Christianity is being destroyed in Iraq in the name of democracy, which looks much more like a fundamentalist Islam. The evidence is reinforced in Article 2 of their Constitution. Also, in Article 4, Article 10, Article 12, Article 41, Part A and Part B.